This is apropos. The French president is headed to Moldova this Wednesday, along with leaders from Germany and Poland ahead of parliamentary elections at the end of next month. The show of support for the EU candidate country comes as it accuses Russia of increasing efforts to destabilise it by interfering in domestic politics. France 24 correspondent Maria Gerth Nicolescu reports.
These protesters have gathered following the call of pro-Russian oligarch Ilan Shor. As parliamentary elections draw closer, Moscow-aligned parties are intensifying their campaign.
We came here to express our disagreement with this dictatorial regime imposed by those in power. There's no other way to call it, because today there is no freedom of expression.
Ilan Shor has promised illegal financial compensation for demonstrators. Protesters deny receiving money, but the police regularly document such payments. According to the government, these rallies are part of a wider Kremlin propaganda campaign to influence the vote. This activist is trying to counter disinformation through explanatory videos on social media. His latest video debunks a deepfake featuring the head of the Electoral Commission.
The fact that a country like France intervenes in our elections is not considered foreign interference.
They discredit the Moldovan authorities so that pro-government, pro-European voters won't turn out, or so that those who support a pro-East, pro-Kremlin path become furious.
Experts estimate that Russia has invested nearly 100 million euros in its interference campaign in Moldova, including voter corruption partly financed through cryptocurrencies, according to several sources.
The money raised through these transactions is used, among other things, to influence Moldovan elections. Moldova is seen as a secondary target in the war against Ukraine and can be used as a tool for destabilization.
Moldova began EU accession talks last year, but keeping a pro-European majority in parliament will be an uphill battle for President Maia Sandu's party.
For more on what's at stake, we're joined now by Clara Volintiru, Black Sea Regional Director at the German Marshall Fund of the United States. Clara, thanks so much for being with us on the programme. As we say, the French president is among a European delegation headed to Moldova tomorrow. So what message will Macron, Merz and Tusk be delivering during the visit, and who exactly will they be sending this message to?
Good evening. Thank you for joining us in this important conversation, because it is a conversation about the security of the whole Europe. Many times we've seen these destabilizing practices piloted in Moldova or in other frontier countries and then spread across the European Union. And we've seen this last year at the presidential elections and at the EU referendum. And then we saw many of those online and offline techniques of destabilization coming up in the elections in Romania or Germany or France. So I think what we should be looking ahead for the Moldovan elections and for the message that the Weimar leaders will be delivering is that Europe stands along the pro-democratic forces in Moldova and for the European future of Moldova. And the target audience of these messages, collective messages, are threefold. One is the Moldovan public that needs to know that Moldova has a strong and consequential stand along the European powers. Secondly, the political elites that should know that they will also be part of a pro-European coalition if they want their country to preserve a European future. And finally, I think it's also a message for Kremlin to show that Moldova will not be left aside or on its own devices in the upcoming elections.
And Clara, how significant in the larger picture then is this trip? You say it's part of a broader strategy being implemented by politicians in key EU member states.
I think it matters a lot there is a very clear block of pro-European voters in Moldova, pro-European supporters, people who understand the future, their personal future and the future of the country inside the European family. But at the same time, there is a majority of Moldovan citizens who haven't yet grasped the full potential of a European trajectory for their country. And so when European leaders show up, they show this message of solidarity and dispute any malign narratives that Moldovan citizens are left aside, that they don't matter for the European, for Western European and European powers. So when you have Ursula von der Leyen, when you have the European Enlargement Commissioner Marta Kos, when you have the Weimar Triangle leaders, President Macron, Chancellor Merz, and Prime Minister Tusk, and when you have a very strong engagement from neighboring Romania with the newly elected president, very strong on the societal resilience part, Nicu Jordan, all of these stances matter for the Moldovan public and again for building a pro-European coalition after the coming elections.
And Moldova, it's essentially been tugged between East and West for decades now. What exactly is Russia's main objective here? And how does it go about interfering in political processes and elections?
Moldova matters along the full side of the European frontier. So if you would have, again, a pro-Russian government in Moldova, then the offensive against Ukraine would be much easier, given that you would have a much lower resistance across the eastern part of the country. I think this is a whole of Europe security stance, and not incidentally, the Weimar Triangle leaders have gathered to discuss the future of Ukraine in Rome this summer, and not incidentally, President Macron has had the first meeting of the European political community in Chisinau a couple of years ago. So I think European leaders are very mindful of the fact that countering Russia's aggression towards not just Ukraine, but the whole of Europe is a process that has to unfold across the full eastern frontier, including Moldova.
And what is the government there doing to fight back against these destabilisation efforts?
The goal has always been to delegitimize the European trajectory, to delegitimize the pro-European political leaders and the European political leaders that support President Maia Sandu. So many of the Russian narratives have been targeting these actors and have tried to show that actually Moldova is better off in a, let's say, in-between status. On the other side, countering these narratives is very intuitive, if you want. The economic prosperity of Moldova is better served in a European trajectory. The rule of law and good governance are better served through the reforms that go hand in hand with its future as a pre-accession process. So there are many benefits to the average citizens that this political stance of President Maia Sandu and the past government have delivered. However, they were not always well articulated, and so the Russian-backed networks that the reporter was mentioning, the Ilan Shore clientelistic networks, have been very able and have managed to sway voters who are undecided or, let's say, less integrated into the overall processes of reform and investments that the country has been undergoing over the past years.
And is all of this a big talking point in Moldova ahead of these elections? Is this something that voters are focusing on or prioritising ahead of the vote?
There is always a rational component and an emotional component. And where we see a very strong penetration of the pro-Russian Ilan Shor-backed networks, it's usually in rural areas, in secondary cities, in small communities, in the neighborhood. And I think it's not only through the clientelistic networks that are fueled by enormous amounts of money delivered from Kremlin via different mechanisms, but it's also this sense of detachment from the center that mayors and local communities sometimes have. And that's paradoxical in a country that's not necessarily very large. So there is a case to be made with regards to a better stakeholder coordination, a structured dialogue where people feel that they are part of Moldova's future and it's not just decided for them. I think that's the main weakness that the pro-Russian narratives are trying to emphasize in support of the pro-Russian political parties.
Clara, thanks so much for being with us on the programme. We'll have to leave it there for now. That is Clara Volintiru, Black Sea Regional Director at the German Marshall Fund of the United States. Thank you.